my name's Esther. I'm a Christian, I have ADHD, and today I want to talk about some of my favorite Christian fiction books. Now hold up, because I know you're going, this is a Christian Bible study channel. Why are you talking about Christian fiction? I want to learn about Bible study, and I absolutely hear you, and I will answer that question for you. Thank you for asking. Okay, so this is not directly related to Bible study, but your life is more than Bible study. There are other parts of your life. And for me, something I struggle with is social media / phone addiction. I just look at it all the time. It is really difficult to get my mind off of that and go to sleep, or off of that and get started on my next task. So because life is more than just sitting down and studying, the Christian life is about every single thing that you do throughout your day. This is something that can affect your time with the Lord. Since we should be walking with the Lord in every second of every hour of the day, here's something that I do to help me do that. And this actually affects the time outside of my reading as well. I have tried to start replacing my phone time with reading time. And although it would be great to just sit down and read the Bible all the time, it's not really how that works for me. I can't get my brain into something as deep and as wordy and as convicting as the Bible if I'm trying to relax and go to sleep. Maybe in the future I'll be able to do that, but right now that's just not my reality. So I've started trying to read some sort of Christian book and have it by my bedside every night. If you need to read a book on your phone, which honestly I do a lot right now, trying to get into only reading physical books, but right now my lamp is broken and I need to go to the store to buy a light, but I never remember to buy a light when I'm at the store, so I have no nightlight. I do read on my phone. That being said, I read Christian fiction books because they are interesting and just something to take my mind off whatever's going on in my day. They help me relax, just like normal reading would, right? Any fiction books. But Christian fiction books specifically help draw my mind back towards God. And lots of times when I'm reading these books, the next day I'll be in a situation where something can call back to one of those books, and because they are books based on God's truth, it actually takes me back to the Bible. So I'll be going through a difficult situation, dealing with a difficult person, remember how a character dealt with that, which actually reminds me how God wants me to deal with that. So they are helpful in my day-to-day life, as well as being a nice, clean thing that you can read before bed to help get your mind in a good place before you go to sleep. There are some of these that directly teach you about the Bible, just happen to be fiction, and some of these that are just fun books that have Christian values. And so I'll tell you which one of these are which. But these are all books that I have personally read and I love. For starters, the book that kind of got me into this entire genre of reading Christian books anyway is Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. I'm sure that you've heard of this one before if you're in any kind of Christian social media circles. There's big controversy about the movie, but even if you hated the movie or have heard bad things about the movie, this is a little bit different. This is the book that got me into reading Christian fiction. Before, I was kind of like, ew, cheesy, gross. So this is 100% fiction. It's set in the gold rush period, so it's a little bit of history if you like historical fiction, but it's based on the book of Hosea. So it's less of teaching you about the Bible and more just a very interesting, deep, heartbreaking, but ends up being all for God's glory kind of story that reminds you of God's truth because it's based on and lines up with the story of Hosea, which is a book of the Bible, which is where Hosea is told by God to go and marry a prostitute, make her his wife. She keeps running away. He keeps going out and finding her again, which reminds us of how God's love for us, no matter how many times we run away, he always comes back for us. This story is based on that. It does talk about prostitution and sexual abuse, not in any graphic terms, but that is in there, just so that you're aware of that. Francine Rivers also has a book that is directly based on the Bible that's called Lineage of Grace. This is one of my favorites. It is about the 5 women that are in Jesus's lineage. So in the first chapter of Matthew, it goes through Jesus's lineage, and for some reason there are women listed, which is weird because who cares if women are in the lineage at that time? And it's women who are prostitutes, who who are outsiders, who some of who perfectly follow everything that they're supposed to do, some of who don't do anything that they're supposed to, but they are still all listed. So Lineage of Grace tells the story of 5 different women, so it's 5 different stories. You may find these as separate books as well, but they're all the same stories, and they are very interesting, very well written, and teach me directly things about my life. So for example, Bathsheba sleeps with the king of Israel. We're not hearing it from David's side, we're hearing it from her side. So how she tries to justify things at first, but then ends up realizing she's living in sin. And what do you do when the consequences for your sin affect your entire life? How do you go back to God after that? There's Tamar, who has a crazy story that I don't even get into yet here, but all sorts of family problems. There's Ruth, who has her own book of the Bible now, but she's an outsider and isn't one of God's chosen people, but ends up getting some of those promises of God anyway because of how faithful she is to God. I would say this is one of those ones that you can read to help you gain a passion for reading the Bible, which is also another reason why I like to read Christian fiction, is for if you have trouble even wanting to read the Bible, sometimes reading these interesting Christian fiction stories can help you be like, oh, that's in the Bible? I want to know more about that. And then you want to read the Bible more. And then one more series by Francine Rivers is A Voice in the Wind. It's based on the time period right after the Bible, a girl living in Jerusalem who is kidnapped and sold into slavery, and how she serves God when she has hardly any choice in anything that she does. It also goes on with other characters in that series. It's very interesting, all about persecution in the early church and how to be a Christian even when nobody else around you is a Christian. So all 3 of those were very historical, fiction-y type stuff. So if that is not your cup of tea, you may like Karen Kingsbury, who does realistic modern fiction, also about Christians. So she has like her whole Baxter family series. I started reading the book Fame, which I think is like a second add-on series, but I could still read it on its own. So it was Fame, Forgiven, Found, and Family. Now I'm reading like Redeemed, which is in the 2nd series. I'll list what the actual order is supposed to be. I read them out of order and it was still great, so that's okay. I did not think I was gonna like these because I'm more of a historical fiction girly, but these realistic fiction ones were really, really good because even though they give you a little bit of that Hallmark cheesy vibes, like cute family farm, small town vibes, they actually all go through really deep, dark things. So it could be tragedies like losing young loved ones through awful circumstances that really happen in real life, or people who are living in sin or decide to sin in ways that we see every day. So it's things like one of them gets his girlfriend pregnant, one of them has a close family member who passes away, one of them has a child who dies in a car crash because of a drunk driver. They do talk about the tragedy of 9/11 because that's the time period that these were written. So if you are interested in reading realistic fiction that's Christian based, you learn about God's character and also learn about the church and how the church is supposed to act. So you get to see kind of what people view the church as, like, oh, they're going to be really judgy about these things, but then really the church is all about forgiveness and drawing in the lost sheep back into your flock, even if they have stepped far away. So there is a lot of issues that this goes over. I wouldn't say it's an issue focused book. They're very fun. There's lots of lighthearted parts and it's lots of romance and love, but it also talks about real life things. Next, if you know me, you know that I'm going to bring up C.S. Lewis. He's my favorite author of all time. I have a tattoo based on one of his books. The first book that I'm going to recommend as Christian fiction is on the more like adult side, not being inappropriate adult, obviously, just not for children, and that is The Screwtape Letters. Now this one took me about 3 times to get into, but it was actually really good once I understood how to read it. So it is written letter style. They're letters from a demon to his nephew, who is also a demon. They both work for the devil. Sounds really scary, but I'll explain why it is so good and why also it's a little bit confusing at first. The confusing part is that everything is the opposite of what we're used to reading. So they have our Father below, which is Satan. I know it sounds super scary, I promise that's about as deep and dark and scary as it gets. And then they talk about the enemy above, which is God. So everything is flipped on its head, but you hear the story of a human who is being tempted by one of these demons, and how C.S. Lewis imagines that the devil thinks about our sin and tempting us into sin. Big ideas in this book are how Satan really wants us distracted more than anything, about how he doesn't have to get us into big sins. Little sins work just fine to get you to hell, which is scary, but very real. I would say this book isn't necessarily scary, but it is deep. And once I got a couple chapters into it, it really wasn't too difficult to read. So if you do start this one, try to get into it a couple chapters before you decide if you're gonna give up and try something else. The first 2 times I could not do it, but the 3rd time I liked it so much that I actually photocopied a page and hung it on my wall because I love it so much. And it's talking all about how much these demons just hate this house. This house is awful and it smells bad and everybody comes away smelling like this awful thing, but the awful thing is love, and they just have no comprehension of how people could love someone without getting anything in return. But that's what Christianity is all about, love with nothing in return, and how beautiful love is because it just gives and gives and gives, and the more you give, the more you want to give. It doesn't make any sense, and these demons don't have love, so they do not understand it. And I have it hung up in my house because I want my house to be that way. For even the dog is covered in this awful stench because everyone is just consumed with this pretense of disinterested love because they think there has to be some sort of scam. How could people do something and get nothing out of it? So it's really something to get you excited about fighting the enemy's lies in your day-to-day life. So fighting the enemy by loving people, inviting them to your house, bringing them a plate of cookies, sharing the gospel with them, really simple things. Those are the kinds of things that fight the enemy, and that is what this book's about. Finally, last but absolutely not least, you knew that I was going to bring this up if you know me at all, we have The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is part of a 7-book series, The Chronicle of Narnia, my personal favorite books of all time. So this book is very well loved. This is my childhood copy of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. This is the book that I have a tattoo of, and this is the gospel, but in fantasy form. So C.S. Lewis wrote out, for this book at least, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the story of how 4 kids that represent humanity go into Narnia and have to fight the White Witch that represents the devil, and one of the children betrays his family, sells them basically to the White Witch, and in order for all of them to be saved, they have to get help from this great majestic lion that represents Jesus. Now, he ends up also being very self-sacrificial, just like Jesus died on the cross. I'm gonna stop that there because you might know the story already. It's very popular. There's movies about it, but if you have not read this yet, I highly recommend it. I know that it's a children's book, but as C.S. Lewis says in the front, if you think you're too old for fairy tales, one day you'll wake up and you'll realize you are old enough to start reading fairy tales again. I love these books. My dad read them to me as a kid, and these have been so helpful my entire life. So just like those books I was talking about at the beginning, these are books where you read it and you might not immediately connect things, but when you're going through something in your life, if you can remember how a character dealt with this, or how Aslan the lion